My name is Lily Madwip, and I have no idea where I am. That first realization came to me on a day like any other, where the sun lazily melted the sky into hues of orange and pink, casting long shadows that stretched beyond the horizon like grasping hands. The suburban neighborhood I had grown up in was a place of orderly lawns and picket fences, where every house stood like a mirror image of the last, only distinguished by the minute details that those who lived there took pride in. A rose bush here, a bird feeder there, but none of it much mattered. It was a place of comfort, a place where the mundane was celebrated and the extraordinary was hidden beneath layers of routine and habit. I sat on the edge of the curb, the sidewalk cool beneath my palms, as I traced patterns in the dust with a stick. There was a certain rhythm to the echo of distant laughter and the hum of cicadas that filled the air, a symphony I had grown accustomed to over the years. I absent-mindedly listened to the world around me, feeling a part of it, yet strangely separate, like a spectator at a play I had seen too many times. But beneath that comforting veneer of normalcy, I couldn't shake an unsettling feeling that had begun to creep into the corners of my mind. It was like a whisper, a persistent murmur that tickled the edges of my consciousness, warning me of something I couldn't quite grasp, a sense of impending disturbance that I tried to ignore, but which lingered like the scent of rain before the storm. It all started a few weeks ago, when I began to notice things that shouldn't be there, a flicker of movement in the corner of my eye, shadows that seemed to shift and twist with a life of their own. At first, I thought it was my imagination, the product of an overactive mind. But then, I began to hear things too, faint whispers that rode the wind and disappeared before I could catch them. Words that made no sense, yet held an uncanny familiarity. I never told anyone about it, not my parents, who were too absorbed in their own world, nor my friends, who would have probably laughed it off as another one of my quirks. I learned long ago that people preferred their reality neat and tidy, without the mess of the unknown spilling in. So I kept it to myself, hoping it would pass, that I could banish it to the realm of dreams where it belonged. That was until the day when everything changed. I was walking home from school, the usual route that took me past the park and down Maple Street, when I felt it. A sudden, inexplicable tug at my senses, pulling me in a direction I had never ventured before. It was as if an invisible thread had wrapped itself around my consciousness, guiding me away from the safety of the familiar and into the depths of the unknown. I hesitated, my rational mind screaming against the impulse, but curiosity got the better of me. I found myself walking down a narrow alley, one that seemed to stretch on endlessly, its walls closing in like the pages of a book. The air was thick and heavy, charged with an energy that made the hair on my arms stand on end. And then I saw it. A door. It was an old, weather-beaten thing, its wood warped and faded, as if it had stood there for centuries, waiting for someone to notice it. My heart pounded in my chest as I reached out, my fingers brushing against the cold metal of the handle. A shiver ran down my spine, but whether it was from fear or anticipation, I couldn't tell. Before I could think, I turned the knob and pushed it open. The moment I crossed the threshold, the world shifted around me. The air crackled with a strange electricity, and the light seemed to bend and warp, casting eerie shadows that danced along the walls. I stepped inside, drawn by a force I couldn't comprehend, and the door slammed shut behind me with a finality that echoed through the silence. I found myself in a room that defied logic, its dimensions shifting and changing with every blink of my eyes. The furniture seemed to float, untethered by gravity, and the walls pulsed with an otherworldly glow. It was both beautiful and terrifying, a place that existed beyond the boundaries of reality. And there, in the center of the room, stood a figure cloaked in shadow. I couldn't make out any details, but I felt its gaze on me, a penetrating stare that seemed to pierce through my soul. I wanted to speak, to ask what this place was and why I was here, but my voice caught in my throat, swallowed by the oppressive silence. The figure raised a hand, and I felt a rush of energy surge through me, igniting every nerve with a burning intensity. Images flashed before my eyes, scenes of chaos and destruction, a world unraveling at the seams. I saw faces twisted in fear, heard cries for help that echoed in my mind, and knew with a certainty that these were not just visions, they were prophecies. In that moment, I understood. I had been brought here for a reason, gifted or cursed, with a power I could neither control nor comprehend. A reluctant hero with a prophetic gift, thrust into a story I had no desire to be a part of. The figure spoke, its voice a whisper that resonated in the deepest corners of my mind. It told me of a world on the brink, where the line between reality and nightmare was thinning, and only I could restore the balance. I had a choice, it said, to accept my fate or turn away and live with the consequences. Trembling, I nodded, though the decision felt like anything but mine. As soon as I did, the room began to dissolve around me, the walls crumbling into nothingness, and I was plunged into darkness. When I awoke, I was back on the curb, the stick still clutched in my hand. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and the streetlights flickered to life, casting soft pools of light on the sidewalk. For a moment, I thought it had all been a dream, a figment of my imagination that had spiraled out of control. But the feeling lingered, a persistent tug at the edges of my awareness, a reminder that what I had seen was real. And with it came the fear, a gnawing dread that settled in the pit of my stomach and refused to leave. I was no longer just a girl living in a suburban neighborhood. I was something more, a link in a chain of events that threatened to unravel everything I knew. Days turned into weeks, and the visions became more frequent, more vivid. I saw things before they happened, glimpses of a world teetering on the edge. At first, I tried to ignore them, to convince myself that I could live a normal life despite the chaos swirling around me. But it was impossible. The images haunted my dreams, bleeding into my waking hours, until I couldn't tell where they ended and reality began. I became withdrawn, lost in a world of my own making, and those around me began to notice. My parents, worried by my distant demeanor, tried to reach out, but their words fell on deaf ears. My friends, confused by my sudden change, drifted away, and I couldn't blame them. How could I explain what I couldn't even begin to understand? The only solace I found was in the moments of clarity, when the visions would align and reveal the path I was meant to take. I followed them blindly, trusting in an instinct I didn't possess, hoping that each step would bring me closer to the truth. And then came the night when it all came to a head. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, when the familiar sensation washed over me, a pull stronger than before, urging me to follow. I got up, slipping into my clothes, and crept out of the house, my heart pounding with each step. The world outside was shrouded in darkness, the air thick with anticipation, as if it too was holding its breath. I followed the path laid out before me, down streets I knew by heart, but which felt foreign in the moonlight. The visions danced at the edges of my consciousness, a kaleidoscope of colors and sounds that guided me forward. I walked until I reached the edge of the neighborhood, where the houses gave way to a vast expanse of open field, the grass swaying gently in the breeze. And there, standing beneath the stars, was the figure from my dreams. It beckoned me closer, and I felt the air shift as I approached, a familiar hum vibrating through my bones. The figure gestured to the sky, and I looked up, my breath catching in my throat as the stars began to move, rearranging themselves into patterns I couldn't comprehend. The figure spoke again, its voice a melody of shadows and light, and I finally understood. The balance of the world was in my hands, and I had the power to set things right. All I had to do was take the first step, to reach out and embrace the gift I had been given. I hesitated, fear and doubt warring within me, but deep down, I knew I had no other choice. I closed my eyes, reaching out with my mind, and felt the universe respond, a symphony of energy that surged through me, connecting me to the very fabric of reality. The world shifted, and I saw beyond the veil glimpses of futures yet to come, paths untrodden and destinies unfulfilled. I saw the darkness that threatened to consume us all, and the light that could banish it forever. It was overwhelming, and yet exhilarating, a power unlike anything I had ever known. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The visions faded, leaving me breathless and trembling, standing alone in the field beneath an ordinary sky. The figure was gone, leaving only the faint echo of its presence behind, a reminder of what had transpired. I returned home, my mind a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions, but one thing was clear. I was no longer the same. I had embraced my fate, accepted the burden placed upon me, and though the future was uncertain, I felt a strange sense of peace. I knew that whatever lay ahead, I would face it with courage and determination, armed with the knowledge that I was not alone. But the fear lingered, a shadow that refused to dissipate. I knew the battle was far from over, that the darkness was still out there, waiting for its chance to strike. And though I had taken the first step, I understood that the journey was just beginning. I am Lily Madwhip, and I have no idea where I am. But I do know this. I will not run. I will stand firm, guided by the whispers of a world unseen, and face whatever comes with unwavering resolve. For in the end, it is not the destination that matters, but the journey we take to get there and the choices we make along the way. There was a time when I thought the world was as simple and predictable as the ticking of a clock. My name is Lily Madwip, and for the better part of my 10 years, the only mysteries I grappled with were the puzzles of my favorite cartoons or the nature of my mother's cooking. We lived in a modest house with a picket fence, and I delighted in the ordinary, the unexceptional rhythm of my days. School, home, play, rinse, repeat. It was a cycle that comforted me, like a favorite lullaby sung on a restless night. But then, as tends to happen in life, the clockwork of my world began to falter. It was small at first, little things that wouldn't warrant concern to the untrained eye. A misplaced toy, a book that fell open to the same page no matter how often I closed it. I paid little mind, dismissing them as quirks of an overactive imagination. But the oddities grew, unfolding like a creeping vine into every corner of my life. My parents, pragmatic to a fault, were the first to notice the changes. My mother, with her warm hands and cooler brow, would often press me with questions I couldn't quite answer. Lily, how did you know about the storm before it was announced? Or why did you say Grandma was coming when she never called? Innocuous questions that, to them, seemed rooted in the ordinary, but to me, were stepping stones to something I couldn't comprehend. The first true disturbance occurred on an evening like any other. The air was heavy with the scent of rain, a preamble to the storm that had been building quietly through the day. I sat at the kitchen table, my homework sprawled before me, though my mind wandered elsewhere. I barely noticed when the lights flickered, an occurrence so usual in our old house that it barely warranted acknowledgement. But then, something shifted in my peripheral vision. A shadow, darker than the approaching night, lingered just beyond the threshold of the hallway. It seemed to pulse with an unnatural rhythm, as if beating in tandem with my heart. I blinked, and it was gone. I dismissed it as a trick of the light, a shadow cast by the swaying trees outside the window. Yet, the unease lingered. It stretched thin across my consciousness, a cobweb I could not quite sweep away. Sleep came fitfully that night, haunted by dreams of things half seen and barely understood. In the morning, I found myself drawn to the hallway where the shadow had been, but there was nothing out of place. Nothing, that is, except the sense that something unseen was watching me. As the days slipped by, the disturbances escalated. Often, I found myself awakened in the night, heart pounding in a chest too small for the fear it contained. Whispers, soft as the rustle of leaves, filled my ears. They were unintelligible yet insistent, a language I couldn't quite grasp. I would call out to my parents, but by the time they reached me, the whispers had faded, leaving me to grapple with their lingering echoes alone. My parents, ever practical, began to grow concerned. A doctor's visit was scheduled, and though there was nothing physically wrong with me, their worry deepened with each unexplained incident. I heard them talking in hushed tones, their words a jumble of concern and confusion. "It's stress," my father would say, his voice carrying the weight of reassurance. "She's 10. What could she be stressed about?" my mother would counter, her voice tinged with a desperation I'd never heard before. When the dreams began to bleed into my waking hours, they decided it was time for a different kind of help. The hospital was a sterile place, all white walls and antiseptic smell, a stark contrast to the vibrant chaos of my thoughts. The doctors there were kind, but distant, their questions probing yet never quite reaching the heart of the matter. "There's nothing wrong with my brain," I insisted time and again, though my conviction wavered with each new test. It was during one of these tests, a simple scan meant to map the untethered threads of my mind, that something truly extraordinary happened. As I lay in the machine, its mechanical hum a lullaby of sorts, the whispers returned. But this time, they were not just in my head. The room darkened, the shadows coalescing into a shape that emerged from the corners of my vision. It was a figure, indistinct and yet undeniably present, hovering near the machine's edge. I watched, frozen in a curious mix of terror and fascination, as the figure gestured with an ethereal hand. The whispers grew louder, a chorus of voices overlapping in a harmony that defied understanding. I closed my eyes, willing the apparition away, and when I opened them again, the figure was gone. The machine whirred to a halt, and the doctor overseeing the test looked at me with eyes wide in disbelief, as if he too had seen the impossible. The incident reverberated throughout the hospital, sparking interest and concern in equal measure. My parents were called in, their faces drawn with worry, though they tried to mask it with smiles and reassurances. The doctors spoke of extraordinary abilities, of phenomena unexplainable by conventional science. Words like psychic and paranormal were whispered in the corridors, and I couldn't help but feel like a specimen under a microscope, dissected by curious eyes. As the days in the hospital stretched into weeks, the shadows became my constant companions. They lurked in the periphery of my vision, never quite visible, yet always present. I began to understand their whispers, fragments of conversations not meant for mortal ears. They spoke of things lost and forgotten, of time unraveling like a poorly woven tapestry. It was both terrifying and intoxicating, this glimpse into a world beyond understanding. The climax came on a stormy night, the wind howling like a beast outside my window. I lay awake, the shadows dancing in the corners of my room. They were more active than ever, their whispers a cacophony that drowned out even the storm's fury. I felt a tug at the edge of my consciousness, a gentle pull that beckoned me to follow. I rose from bed, my movements guided by an unseen hand. The shadows parted before me, forming a path that led to the hospital's deserted corridors. I walked with a purpose I didn't fully understand, my bare feet silent on the cold linoleum floors. The whispers grew louder, a chorus that seemed to echo from the depths of time itself. It led me to a door, one I had never seen before. The handle was cold under my fingers, the metal biting into my palm as I turned it. The room beyond was bathed in an unnatural light, the air thick with a palpable energy. In the center stood the figure I had seen during the test, its form now more defined. a silhouette against the ethereal glow. The figure raised a hand, and the whispers ceased, leaving a silence so profound it seemed to echo through my very soul. It spoke, not in words, but in a language of thoughts and images, painting pictures in my mind that defied description. I understood then that the shadows were not malevolent, but guardians of secrets too vast for human comprehension. As I stood there, the feeling of dread that had haunted me for weeks ebbed away, replaced by a calm acceptance. I was a part of something much larger, a thread in the intricate tapestry of existence. The shadows were my allies, not my foes, and they had chosen me for reasons I could not yet grasp. The figure nodded, a gesture of acknowledgement, before dissolving into the light. The room dimmed, and I found myself alone in the dark once more. But the fear was gone, replaced by an understanding that transcended words. I returned to my bed, the whispers now a gentle lullaby that soothed me into a deep, dreamless sleep. For the first time in weeks, I felt at peace, the shadows now my silent sentinels, watching over me as I slept. When morning came, the hospital was abuzz with stories of the storm, of power outages and strange occurrences. I listened with a knowing smile, my secret safe within the confines of my heart. My parents came to take me home, their relief palpable, though they continued to search my eyes for answers they could not find. The lingering fear was gone, replaced by a quiet understanding. The shadows were still there, ever present in the corners of my vision. But now they were familiar, a part of me I had come to accept. My life resumed its former rhythm, yet everything was subtly changed, as if a veil had been lifted, revealing a world far richer and more complex than I had ever imagined. I returned to school, to the routines that had once seemed so predictable, but now I found joy in the ordinary, in the knowledge that there was more to life than met the eye. I had glimpsed the extraordinary, and though it remained just beyond reach, I knew it was there, waiting in the shadows. And so I embraced the unknown, the whispers that sang to me in the night, the shadows that danced just out of sight. My name is Lily Madwip, and while there may be nothing wrong with my brain, my world is forever changed, alive with the mystery and wonder of the unseen. And that, I realized, was the greatest gift of all. In a world that thrives on routine and the mundane, I, Lily Madwip, found solace in what others might deem unsettling. My days were defined by the predictability of routine, starting with the morning sun casting elongated shadows over my bedroom floor, and ending with the whispered secrets of the night wind. I was 11, an age many find filled with innocence and simplicity. Yet for me, it had been a tapestry woven with threads of the extraordinary and the inexplicable. My parents had been concerned about the things I spoke of, the things I saw. They whispered among themselves, exchanging worried glances when they thought I couldn't see. They believed that therapy might help, that the insights of a professional could provide clarity where there was only confusion. And so, I found myself sitting in an overstuffed armchair, my small frame almost swallowed by its plushness, facing Dr. Harris in her dimly lit office. Dr. Harris's office was a study in contrasts. The walls were adorned with degrees and certificates, each one a testament to her expertise. A bookshelf groaned under the weight of thick, leather-bound tomes, their spines glistening with the promise of knowledge. Yet, for all its professionalism, the room exuded a warmth that was deceptively comforting. It was as if the very walls whispered reassurance, promising safety and understanding. Dr. Harris herself was a woman of indeterminate age, her hair streaked with strands of silver that caught the light as she moved. Her eyes were kind but searching, as though she could peer into the very depths of my soul. She began with questions that were simple on the surface, asking about my friends, my school, my hobbies. I answered dutifully, my voice a steady monotone. It was when she gently inquired about my imaginary friends that the atmosphere shifted. I bristled at the term. Downright offensive, I thought. They were as real to me as the therapist sitting across from me. I tried to explain that they weren't imaginary, that they lived in the spaces between reality. But my words seemed to float past her, unable to penetrate the barrier of skepticism she had erected. The first disturbance, as I came to think of it, occurred during one of these sessions. We were discussing dreams, and I mentioned a recurring one where I walked through a cemetery at night, the moon illuminating the path like a silver beacon. I described the gravestones as old and weathered, their inscriptions faded with time. As I spoke, a sense of disquiet began to settle in the room, like a cold mist creeping in under the door. Dr. Harris leaned forward, her interest piqued. "And what do you see there, Lily?" she asked, her voice soft, almost coaxing. I hesitated, the words catching in my throat. "I see people," I said finally. "Not like ghosts, but people who are waiting." Dr. Harris's pen paused over her notepad, her expression one of polite curiosity. Waiting for what? I shook my head, unable to articulate the feeling of expectation, of a story unfinished. "I don't know," I admitted, "but they know me. They call me by name." The room seemed to grow colder, the shadows lengthening and deepening. A shiver ran down my spine as I felt the weight of unseen eyes upon me. I glanced around, half expecting to see the people from my dream materializing in the corners of the room. But there was nothing, only the ticking of the clock marking time, relentless and indifferent. The escalation began subtly, almost imperceptibly. Nights became a tapestry of vivid dreams and waking visions. I would find myself in the cemetery again, the air heavy with the scent of earth and decay. The people were always there, their faces a blur of familiarity and obscurity. They spoke without words, their messages conveyed in a language I couldn't fully understand, but felt deep within my bones. During the day, I became acutely aware of a presence that lingered just beyond my periphery. It was as if the air itself was alive, charged with an energy that set my nerves on edge. Objects would move ever so slightly when I wasn't looking, the chill of a phantom breeze brushing against my skin. And then there were the whispers, just at the edge of hearing, calling my name with a familiarity that was both comforting and terrifying. My parents were oblivious to the changes. their lives a routine of work and trivial pursuits. They noticed the shadows under my eyes and the pallor of my skin, but attributed it to the trials of adolescence. Dr. Harris, however, seemed attuned to the shift. She watched me closely during our sessions, her questions probing deeper, her eyes searching mine with a relentless intensity. It wasn't until a particularly restless night that everything reached a crescendo. I found myself once again in the cemetery, but this time, something was different. The air crackled with tension, and the people were more distinct than ever before. They formed a circle around me, their eyes reflecting the pale light of the moon. I felt a pull, a compulsion to move towards them, to become a part of their unending vigil. As I stepped forward, the ground beneath me seemed to tremble, the earth pulsating with a rhythm that matched my racing heartbeat. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices intertwining, each one vying for attention. My mind felt stretched to its limits, the boundaries between reality and dream blurring until I couldn't distinguish one from the other. In that moment, I understood what they were waiting for. They needed me, my presence acting as a catalyst, a bridge between their world and mine. I was both terrified and exhilarated, caught in the grip of an experience that defied explanation. The realization settled over me like a shroud. I was connected to this place, to these people in ways I couldn't comprehend. The climax came swiftly, a crescendo of sensation and emotion that left me breathless. I awoke drenched in cold sweat, my heart thundering in my chest. The room was dark, the only light a sliver of moonlight cutting across the floor. I sat up, the weight of the dream pressing down on me, a palpable presence that lingered even in the waking world. The next day, I excused myself from school, feigning illness. My parents, preoccupied with their own lives, accepted my explanation with little more than a cursory glance. I made my way to Dr. Harris's office, driven by a sense of urgency I couldn't ignore. She greeted me with her usual calm demeanor, but there was a flicker of concern in her eyes as she noted my disheveled appearance. As I recounted the events of the night, her expression shifted from professional detachment to something resembling disbelief. I described the faces, the voices, the overwhelming sensation of being called to something greater than myself. Dr. Harris listened in silence, her pen forgotten on the notepad, her eyes never leaving my face. When I finished, she sat back, her hands clasped in her lap. For a long moment, she said nothing, the silence stretching between us like a living thing. Finally, she spoke, her voice gentle but firm. "Lily, what you're experiencing is extraordinary, but it's important to understand that our minds are powerful. They can create worlds that feel real, but they're just that, creations." I felt a surge of frustration, the words forming a barrier between us. "But it's real," I insisted, my voice rising. "I know it's real." Dr. Harris leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. "Then let's explore it together, Lily. Not as something to fear, but as something to understand." Her offer was sincere, her belief in the process of discovery genuine. Yet, even as I nodded, I knew in my heart that no amount of therapy or analysis could unravel the mystery of my connection to the otherworldly. It was a bond forged in the unknown, one that defied logic and reason. As I left her office, the lingering fear settled into my bones, a constant companion that shadowed my every step. I could feel the eyes of the people from my dream, watching, waiting. The world around me seemed to vibrate with their presence, an invisible thread binding us together. In the days that followed, I tried to return to normalcy, to immerse myself in the banalities of everyday life. Yet the sense of the extraordinary remained, a whisper at the edge of my consciousness. The cemetery and its denizens were never far from my thoughts, their silent vigil a reminder that I was part of something larger, something that defied explanation. I never returned to Dr. Harris's office, the promise of understanding overshadowed by the certainty of my own truth. The dreams continued, the cemetery an ever-present landscape in the theater of my mind. And though the fear lingered, it was tempered by a sense of belonging, a recognition that in the spaces between reality lay a world as real as any. My name is Lily Madwip, and I don't need a therapist. What I need is to embrace the extraordinary within the ordinary, to walk the line between the seen and the unseen. For in that liminal space, I find not only fear, but also the promise of understanding, a promise that I am not alone. I have always found driving to be a meditative act, a gentle hum that drowns out the clamor of life. The car's smooth motion through the city's arteries offers a semblance of control in an uncontrollable world. On Tuesday, the air was crisp, and the sun hung low in the sky, casting elongated shadows that danced across the pavement. The city was just beginning to stir, the streets populated with an early morning rush that spoke of beginnings and destinations. As I meandered through the familiar route towards my office, my thoughts wandered to mundane matters, meetings, deadlines, the grocery list I had yet to compile. The radio played softly, a gentle accompaniment to the rhythmic thud of tires on asphalt. There was nothing extraordinary about this morning. It was a portrait of normalcy, perhaps even tranquility. But as I approached the intersection at Willow and Main, something shifted. It was subtle, like a thread pulling tight, threatening to unravel what had been seamlessly woven. A flicker of something in the corner of my eye, an anomaly in the peripheral, distracted me just long enough. I blinked, and the world seemed to tilt, the familiar setting suddenly rendered alien. The vision came abruptly, a vivid tableau that invaded my senses. I was no longer in my car, but standing in a hospital room. White walls, the sterile smell of antiseptic, and a heart monitor's steady beep surrounded me. A woman lay in the bed, her face pallid, eyes closed as if in sleep. Yet there was something in the room, a heaviness, a sense of impending loss that clung to the air like a shroud. The vision shattered as quickly as it had appeared, leaving me gasping for breath. The light had changed, and a cacophony of horns erupted behind me, snapping reality back into place. Disoriented, I pressed the gas pedal and continued, though the world around me had irrevocably changed. In the days that followed, the vision lingered at the edges of my consciousness, a persistent whisper that refused to be silenced. I found myself haunted by the woman's face, her identity a mystery, yet somehow deeply significant. I tried to dismiss it as stress or a trick of the mind, but the sensation that it was something more, a premonition of sorts, was a weight I could not shake. As the week wore on, strange coincidences began to pepper my days. I would see glimpses of the hospital room in reflective surfaces, catch the echo of the heart monitor's beat in the most unexpected places. Each time, I would be filled with an inexplicable dread, my heart racing, palms clammy, like the very air had conspired to suffocate me. It was on Thursday, during a rare lunch break, that I decided to speak of it to anyone other than myself. A colleague, Dan, who had a penchant for the supernatural, seemed the ideal confidant. We sat in the bustling cafe, the city a blur of motion beyond the window. Dan, I began hesitantly, stirring my coffee. Have you ever experienced something you couldn't explain, like visions or premonitions? He chuckled, a sound that was both amused and curious. What, like predicting the future? I nodded, unsure how to articulate the gravity of what I had been experiencing without sounding insane. I keep seeing this hospital room and a woman. It's like I'm there, but I'm not. Dan regarded me with an analytical eye, his amusement giving way to intrigue. Could just be a dream. Stress does weird things to the mind. Maybe, I conceded, though the word tasted like a lie. But it feels so real, like it's showing me something I need to understand. He shrugged. If it keeps happening, maybe you should see someone about it. You know, talk it out. The conversation offered little solace, but in voicing the vision, I felt a small measure of relief. Yet, the sense of urgency that had been building within me did not abate. Instead, it climbed to an insistent crescendo, demanding my attention with increasing ferocity. On Friday evening, the visions began to escalate. They came not as flickers or ephemeral whispers, but as full-bodied apparitions that consumed my senses. I was no longer in control. They seized me without warning, plunging me into that sterile hospital room with an intensity that left me breathless. The woman's face grew more familiar with each encounter, her features etched with an ineffable sadness. I felt a connection to her that defied logic, as though our fates were somehow intertwined. The visions became more frequent, more detailed. The sound of rain against the window, the murmur of voices beyond the door, each element sharpening into painful clarity. I became a prisoner of these moments, lost in a cycle of confusion and dread. Sleep eluded me, my nights consumed by fragments of a reality, not my own. I began to fear the quiet moments when the visions would seize me, transforming the mundane into a theater of unresolved tension. On Saturday morning, exhaustion gnawing at my bones, I decided to act. The visions had reached a fevered pitch, and I knew I could not continue to live in this state of limbo. There was an urgency, a pull, that guided me towards a decision I did not fully understand. I found myself driving, the city's familiar grid passing by in a blur. I followed no map, no conscious direction, only the insistent pull of something deeper. The streets unwound beneath my tires, leading me to a part of town I rarely ventured, a place where the skyline gave way to the sprawling complex of a hospital. The building loomed, an edifice of glass and steel, imposing in its solemnity. As I stepped inside, the sterile scent of antiseptic met me, and a shiver ran down my spine. I wandered the corridors, the linoleum floors gleaming under harsh fluorescent lights. It was there, in the labyrinthine passageways, that the vision became reality. I turned a corner and saw the room, the same room from my visions. The door stood ajar, and I approached it with bated breath, my heart thundering in my chest. Inside, the woman lay as I had seen her countless times before. Her eyes were closed, her breathing shallow, yet there was a peace about her that had eluded me in the visions. The beeping of the heart monitor was a lullaby of life, constant and reassuring. A nurse entered, her expression one of surprise. "Are you family?" she asked, her tone gentle yet probing. I hesitated, unsure how to answer. "No, I felt like I needed to be here." The nurse regarded me with a mixture of empathy and curiosity. "She's been here a while. No visitors. It's nice that someone came." As I stood at the threshold of the room, the weight of the visions began to lift, replaced by a profound sense of connection. I realized that what I had seen was not a warning of doom, but a beckoning towards understanding, towards compassion beyond the confines of logic. I visited her often in the days that followed, bringing flowers to brighten the sterile room. I spoke to her, though she never responded, sharing stories of the world outside, of mundane happenings that felt monumental in their simplicity. And then, one afternoon, she awoke. Her eyes, a mirror of the sky on a clear day, met mine with a recognition that startled us both. She smiled, a gentle curve of her lips that spoke of gratitude, of a shared understanding that transcended words. Her name was Julia, and in her waking, the visions ceased. The world resumed its predictable orbit, yet it was forever altered in the wake of what I had experienced. The ordinary became extraordinary, each moment infused with the potential for connection, for understanding. Life continued, as it inevitably does, yet a lingering fear remained. A fear not of the unknown, but of the depths of understanding that lay beyond the veil of what we perceive. It was a reminder that in the tapestry of existence, there are threads unseen, weaving connections we may never fully comprehend. And though the visions no longer haunted me, the memory of them did, a testament to the fragility and wonder of human connection, an echo of the modern Cassandra that whispered of the beauty and terror of knowing. I remember the day I visited the clinic. It was one of those overcast mornings where the clouds hung low, as if gently pressing down on the shoulders of every pedestrian. I had been experiencing headaches for months, migraines that blurred my vision and left me incapacitated for hours on end. The specialists had all prescribed various medications, none of which provided more than temporary relief. That was when Dr. Langley suggested a more unconventional approach, a new experimental optical surgery. The clinic was situated on a quiet street lined with sagging trees, their leaves whispering secrets to those who cared to listen. Inside, it was sterile, the sort of pristine that made me feel small and out of place. Dr. Langley was a tall, thin man with a voice as smooth as silk, and his assurances were warm enough to melt away my apprehensions. He spoke of cutting-edge technology, of new eyes that could alleviate my suffering. The promise of finally living without pain was enough to convince me. The procedure was swift. I lay on a reclined chair, the room dimly lit and filled with the hum of machines. I was conscious throughout, a local anesthetic dulling the sensations to a mere pressure. I gazed upwards at the ceiling tiles, each square a portal to a different thought, and drifted in and out of daydreams. The last thing I remember before succumbing to the dark embrace of sleep was the gentle patter of rain against the window, a rhythmical lullaby that carried me away. When I awoke, it was to a world transformed. Colors seemed to dance with a vibrancy I had never before noticed, each hue crisp and vivid. My new eyes were indeed miraculous. The migraines ceased, banished into the void where forgotten ailments resided. I was free. For several weeks, life resumed a comforting normalcy. I returned to my work, interacted with friends, and relished the simple pleasures now devoid of pain. Yet, as often happens with things too good to be true, the first disturbance came quietly, almost apologetically. It occurred on an ordinary evening as I was returning home. The streets were alive with the ebb and flow of urban life, the dull roar of conversation, the distant wail of a siren. I paused at a crosswalk, waiting for the light to change, when something inexplicable happened. I saw a man, his face obscured by the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat, standing across the street. In his hand, he held an ornate pocket watch, the kind you might find in an old-fashioned mystery novel. As he glanced down at the watch, a shiver crawled along my spine. Suddenly, the scene shifted, as if someone had switched the channel of my vision. For a fleeting moment, I saw the same man lying on the ground, the pocket watch shattered beside him. The image was so vivid, so terribly real, that I gasped aloud, and then it was gone. The street as it had been, the man still standing, oblivious to the fate I had just seen. The light changed, and the world resumed its steady march forward, leaving me to question my sanity. Days passed, and the occurrence faded into the background of my mind like a half-remembered dream. But then it happened again, and again. Each vision was a harbinger of tragedy, a glimpse into a future I was powerless to alter. A woman at the grocery store, laughing as she reached for a carton of milk, only for me to see her slip on a patch of ice days later. A child chasing a ball into the street, the subsequent vision a screech of tires and a heart-wrenching scream. I began to dread these sightings, each one more harrowing than the last, an eerie sense of déjà vu coloring my every encounter. The escalation came swiftly. My waking hours were haunted by these premonitions, each one more vivid, more urgent. I found solace in solitude, retreating to the sanctuary of my home, hoping that isolation might stem the tide of visions. But they followed me there, invading my dreams. leaving me exhausted and jittery. I reached out to Dr. Langley, hoping he might offer some explanation. His voice, once a comfort, now held an edge of skepticism as he reassured me that such side effects were unheard of. He suggested a follow-up examination, but I could sense his disbelief, an undertone that this was a figment of my imagination. I agreed to the appointment, but felt a growing resolve to face this alone. One night, as I lay in the quiet confines of my bedroom, a vision struck with such force that it left me breathless. I saw myself standing in an unfamiliar lodge, the walls lined with hunting trophies that seemed to watch with lifeless eyes. Outside, a storm raged, the windows rattling in their frames. I was not alone. There were others, faces I did not recognize, their features a blur. The air was thick with tension, a palpable fear that clung to my skin. As the vision intensified, I caught a glimpse of myself, gripping an object, a key, its surface cold and metallic against my palm. I turned to see a door, heavy and foreboding, and as I reached for the handle, the world snapped back to the confines of my room, leaving me trembling in the darkness. Compelled by an unseen force, I set out the following day to find this lodge, a place I had never visited, but which felt inexorably tied to my fate. I drove for hours, the roads winding and narrow, leading me deeper into the heart of the woods. When I finally arrived, it was as though the lodge had sprung from the depths of my mind, every detail as I had seen. Inside, the air was cool and still, the shadows long and deep. My footsteps echoed softly as I explored, each room a portal to a different past. The trophies on the walls seemed to turn their hollow gaze upon me, silent sentinels of this forgotten world. As the day waned, the storm from my vision began to gather, dark clouds rolling across the sky, their promise of rain unfulfilled. I found myself in the main hall, drawn to a door at the far end. It was the same door from my vision, solid oak, its handle gleaming with the dim light of the fading day. I hesitated, fear a cold hand at the back of my neck, but the pull was undeniable. As I reached out, the key from my vision appeared in my hand, its weight a comfort against the unknown. The moment the door swung open, the atmosphere shifted. It was as if the lodge itself held its breath, waiting. Beyond the threshold lay a room unlike any other, its walls lined with mirrors that reflected not just the present, but something else, moments fleeting and elusive. The reflections danced with a life of their own, each one a tapestry of what might have been or was yet to come. As I stood there, the weight of the visions pressed upon me with a new clarity. They were not mere glimpses of the future, but echoes of a myriad of possibilities. I understood then that my new eyes saw not one path, but many, each choice a thread in the vast tapestry of existence. The realization was both liberating and terrifying. I could alter the course of events, avert disaster, save lives, but at what cost? The burden of knowledge was heavy, a responsibility I had not asked for, and yet it was mine to bear. As the storm finally broke outside, the rain a symphony against the roof, I closed the door to the mirrored room, The key once more a reassuring presence. I returned home, the world unfamiliar in its normalcy. Each face in the street a story untold. The visions did not cease, but with each one, I learned to navigate the labyrinth of possibilities, discerning which paths needed intervention and which were best left to unfold on their own. The trials of those early days became a distant whisper, replaced by a quiet understanding of my place within the greater design. Yet, the fear lingers, a shadow that stretches with the setting sun. I fear not for myself, but for the world as it dances on the edge of chaos and order. In the solitude of night, as I lie in the embrace of sleep, I wonder about the limits of my sight. A gift or a curse, it binds me to a fate I cannot escape. And though I walk this path willingly, the question remains: what awaits beyond the edge of vision? There's a peculiar kind of comfort that comes with routine, a gentle lull in the predictable drift of daily life, with its familiarities and routines. Each day, I wake up at precisely 7:00 a.m., the soft chime of my alarm clock gently coaxing me from the depths of sleep. I rise, wash, and dress in the soft light filtering through the curtains. Breakfast is always the same: a steaming cup of coffee, black, and a slice of toast, butter melting into every crevice. I glance out of the window, watching the neighborhood awaken with the rising sun. Cars begin to hum down the street, their headlights flickering off as daylight claims its place. The city is a living organism, breathing, humming with life. I find solace in the rhythm of its heartbeat as I make my way to the office. The subway rocks me gently, like a cradle, the mixed scents of coffee and perfume wafting through the confined space. Faces, familiar yet anonymous, surround me, each immersed in their own world of thoughts and digital screens. I immerse myself in the pages of a novel, losing myself in fictional worlds as the cityscape outside the windows blurs into indistinct colors. Work is a continuation of this comforting mundanity. The office buzzes with the sound of telephones, the rhythmic tapping of keyboards, the occasional murmur of conversation. My colleagues and I exchange polite nods, our interactions practiced and brief. The hours slip by unnoticed, swept away in the steady flow of tasks and deadlines. But recently, there's been a shift, a subtle disturbance in my otherwise placid existence. It began innocuously enough, a flutter of unease at the edge of my consciousness. At first, I dismissed it as fatigue, a consequence of sleepless nights spent immersed in books. But the feeling persisted, growing more insistent with each passing day. It was during one such night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, that I first experienced it. A vision, vivid and unsettling. I stood in a sunlit garden, the air fragrant with the scent of blooming flowers. Laughter filled the air, light and joyful. In the distance, I saw her, a figure clothed in white, her face obscured by the brilliance of the sun. She waved to me, a gesture filled with warmth and familiarity. But as I stepped forward, the scene shifted. The sky darkened, clouds gathering overhead in a menacing swell. The garden withered, flowers shriveling beneath an unseen weight. And then, darkness. I awoke with a start, the remnants of the vision lingering like a shadow. My heart raced, my breath shallow. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a dream. But what did it mean? Was it merely the product of an overstimulated mind, or a glimpse into something more profound? The vision haunted me, casting a pall over my waking hours. Despite my efforts to dismiss it as a figment of my imagination, the unease persisted, a constant companion that colored my perception of reality. Days blurred into weeks, each one marked by the recurrence of the vision. The details remained unchanged. The garden, the woman, the darkness. I became consumed by the need to understand, to decipher the meaning hidden within the folds of my dreams. I sought solace in research, poring over books on dreams, premonitions, and the mysteries of the subconscious mind. But the answers eluded me, each theory only deepening the chasm of uncertainty. The more I pondered, the more a chilling possibility gnawed at the edges of my thoughts. What if the vision was a premonition, a glimpse into a future I was powerless to change? The idea was both terrifying and intoxicating. Could I, an ordinary man with no claim to the mystical, truly be foreseeing what was yet to come? It was during a late-night walk that the escalation began. The city streets were deserted, save for the occasional flicker of neon lights from shop windows. I wandered aimlessly, my thoughts a maelstrom of anxiety and confusion. It was then that I saw her again, not in a vision, but in the flesh. The woman from my dreams, standing beneath a street lamp, her features obscured by shadow. I froze, the world narrowing to the figure before me. She turned, her eyes meeting mine, and in that moment I felt an overwhelming wave of recognition. It was as if I'd known her all my life, though I couldn't recall where or when. She smiled, a gesture that was both comforting and unsettling, and then she was gone, vanished into the night. I returned home, my mind reeling from the encounter. Was it a trick of the light, a manifestation of my tired mind, or was it proof that my visions were bleeding into reality? I struggled to make sense of it, but the answers remained elusive, slipping through my fingers like sand. The days that followed were marked by a growing sense of urgency. The visions intensified, each one more vivid than the last. I found myself drawn to the garden, standing at its edge, unable to cross the threshold. The woman's presence loomed large in my mind, a constant specter that haunted my every thought. I feared what lay beyond the darkness, yet I was powerless to turn away. It was during one of these visions that the climax unfolded. The garden stretched before me, its beauty marred by a sense of foreboding. The woman beckoned, her eyes filled with an unspoken plea. I hesitated, torn between the desire to reach her and the fear of what awaited. As I took a tentative step forward, the darkness descended, engulfing the garden in its oppressive embrace. I awoke, heart pounding, drenched in sweat. The vision was different this time, more vivid, more insistent. It felt like a warning, a harbinger of something terrible yet inevitable. The fear was palpable, a tangible presence that clung to me, refusing to be shaken. From that moment on, the sense of impending doom lingered over me like a shroud. I became hyper-aware of my surroundings, each face, each interaction tinged with the fear that the vision was on the cusp of becoming reality. The woman remained a constant in my thoughts, her image etched into my mind like a brand. I found myself searching for her in the faces of strangers, desperate for a sign, an indication of what was to come. Life continued its course, indifferent to the turmoil brewing within me. The city pulsed with life, its inhabitants oblivious to the storm that raged in my mind. I moved through the days in a daze, the line between reality and vision blurring with each passing moment. The routine that once provided comfort now felt like a cage, trapping me in a cycle of inevitability. I often wondered what would happen if the vision came true. Would it be a fulfillment of fate, or merely the product of a self-fulfilling prophecy? The uncertainty gnawed at me, a constant reminder of my powerlessness in the face of the unknown. And yet, beneath the fear, there was a flicker of hope, a hope that the vision, despite its ominous tone, held the key to understanding. Perhaps in confronting the darkness, I could find peace, a release from the suffocating grip of premonition. As the days turned to months, the vision remained unfulfilled, a constant specter that loomed at the edge of my consciousness. I learned to live with the fear, to find moments of tranquility in the chaos. The city continued its dance, a testament to the resilience of life in the face of uncertainty. I never saw the woman again, but her presence remained a part of me, a reminder of the delicate balance between reality and the unseen. I often ponder what would have happened had I crossed the threshold, had I embraced the unknown. Perhaps one day I will find the courage to step into the darkness and discover what lies beyond. For now, I live in the shadow of a vision of happiness, of darkness, and the tenuous thread that binds them. A reminder that life is a tapestry woven from the threads of the known and the unknown, and that sometimes the greatest fear is not what lies ahead, but the realization that we may never truly understand the path we tread.